Hello and welcome to Gunnar Weiskamp's web development. Today, lesson 17, Entity Framework, and this is part 1. And in this part 1 we'll be looking at code first, but also in this part 1 we'll be talking about the overall thing of what Entity Framework is. So that brings me to the first one. So what is Entity Framework? Entity Framework is known as an ORM, which stands as an Object Relational Mapping Process or device. Basically, what Entity Framework was created for was to allow developers to merge an application with a database in an easier manner. So that's basically the concept of it. Entity Framework can work with a web, desktop, or console app. Most applications that I know of. There are three distinct ways that the above is done. Three distinctive ways Entity Framework can be done. They are code first, model first, or database first. We will talk about each one in its own separate tutorial. Today, as mentioned, we're looking at code first. So in here, in code first, what the process is you create a model class, just a normal class, and in this model class it will hold the same fields that you will want to have in your database. So you're creating a class with objects in it, say first name, last name, telephone number, and you might want that mapped to a new database, and in a table you'll have personal information, where in that personal information table you'll want username, last name, and telephone number. So that's a really important distinct thing that I've learned from the code first approach. You really need to make a folder just for database tables that you're creating in the code first approach. I think that's a better way of doing it, rather than possibly putting everything in the models folder, which I've actually done in my demo here. So code first, as the name suggests, means that there is no database present. Once you have created all the components in your application via the use of the Entity Framework, you can then migrate them into the database environment. Typically a good use for code first approach is in a new application where there is no database. I'm going to be blunt here. I do not think the code first part of Entity Framework is of any good use whatsoever. I'm going to be blunt there. Basically because code first allows you to do, from what I'm seeing, most, say 90% of what you can do with SQL, which you might say that's great, so we're covering all the bases, but then you still have that 10% where it can't do that. Secondly, you then have to learn the code first approach against the SQL approach. And most developers will know the SQL approach first. So you're telling a developer, you now have to learn two ways to do the same thing. There's many different reasons. Code first is highly flexible. It can create stored procedures. From my research, I don't know if it can create complicated stored procedures. Can the code first approach create SQL Server triggers? There are so many, and sooner or later, a database administrator or database developer in your company will probably make changes in the database area, not via C#, because they know SQL better. And so they'll make those changes there, and then you have to draw that information back into your application. You will create a mishmash of your development process against or with a database. Do we do the SQL in this chance, or do we go back to code first? You know, obviously I've played around with code first, looking at it to learn, but I would highly recommend that it's not used. I'm not normally this opinionated, but in this one, and I've read a couple of blogs, one person was saying code first removes or gives you the ability not to use SQL. That's not a positive. That's just replacing one process with another. And the developer doing it, reading it, already knows the SQL. 9 times out of 10, that'll be the case. So getting that is not a positive. Replacing one with another, which the other process does already exactly the same thing, is not a positive. But anyway, that's my spiel on the negatives of the code first approach compared to the model entity framework approach and the database entity framework approach. The model has a few, I think, a few more things. The best one for me is entity framework database approach, because I believe there are what we call separation of concerns in architecture. Each process has its place, and it does that well, and it doesn't try to overlap those processes in other areas. So SQL is designed to do that process. C# is designed to do certain other facets, and then you have your views and your dynamic code like JavaScript, and it has its processes. They've all got separation of concerns. They're all separated to do their own thing to make the overall app, and that is always a good architecture process to use, and that's why I think the database entity framework is the best approach out of the three. But enough on that. Let's have a look at code first. So it's good to just have understanding of things. So to create today's app, I'm using Visual Studio 2013. So first go to New Project as shown there, then here in Web, just as shown here in B, I've got 4.5 as the framework, and in C we want an empty MVC application. Okay, so let's dive into some code. Alright, so we have here our blank MVC application, as we can see on the right there. First thing we're going to do is inject entity framework. So we go here to manage NuGet packages. I can type in here oh, I saw it there. there it is. So here we go, just obviously press install. And so when you install Entity Framework, it gives you the ability to for all three processes. You don't have to put a separate Entity Framework in, say, for code first, or database first, or model first. One does everything. So as mentioned before, the code first approach is highly flexible. It does give you the ability to create stored procedures in a C# code process. It allows you to create indexes, foreign keys, so it is highly flexible. And today we're just going to be creating foreign keys, two tables, which we'll migrate and create in our new database application. So Entity Framework has been injected. So what is next step? I do have some notes. I want to try to keep them. We're going to add the models in the context class, right? So where are we going to add? Let's add this here. So here we are adding in the classes, which we're going to migrate and create our database from. What technically, the way I see it, you should actually probably create another folder here called possibly database models or database classes, rather than putting everything here in our models folder. But for demonstration purposes, I'm looking to keep this simple. I do want to use my, so we're going to department info and personal info today. So our first class is called personal info. And new class got a mistype there. Right. Yes, I've typed personal without an IRL. It's hard to tell, isn't it? Personal, oops, that's capital, info, right. While that's doing that, let's grab some code from these classes to make everything just that little bit quicker. Yep, that's spelt correctly. Let's paste that in there. We've got a few errors coming up, which I'm sort of expecting. Let's get our department. I'm going to do all the code and then I'm going to discuss it. That's how I prefer to do things. So if this is going a bit fast, I'll go back and refer to code processes. We've got, let's fix these errors but while we're here. So with code first approach, model dots, I get this one a little bit confused. There it is. We have to bring the data annotations. So here what we're doing, so sorry, well, I wasn't going to talk about code first, but we will do it in this case. These objects, this is going to be our database table. We're going to have a department ID and we're going to have a department description against that. What we have to bring in is this attribute called key, and that makes this the primary key on that table. And you need to do that in the code first approach, because later on if we don't put that in, the entity framework will not like that, because it forces you to actually put a primary key in on the table, from what I can see. Unless there are other aspects which I'm not knowledgeable of, where you can actually specify that it has none. But anyway, so what this does is makes this guy here the primary key for that table. And this guy resides in the system.componentModel.data annotations. So I will talk about code as we sort of go along, because this might be more appropriate. And we have to bring that same namespace into here. Oops. So the same goes to this class here. We shouldn't, there's something missing here. Oh no, so there's nothing missing here yet. There is something missing, sorry. And let's bring him in. So it's, is it schema? That's the guy. So two different things here. So in here we've got a personal information which will hold student information, student personal information. And we're having a student ID, a student name, and a department ID, because each student must have a department. And he's going to be our foreign key, as you can probably guess. So the code first approach does allow you to make all, well, from what I know, most, you know, I'm talking about 80% of 90% of things that SQL Server can create, generally, as a generalization. So that's a good thing. And here below we have our foreign key, and this guy's going to reference this class over here, our department info. So here we are creating that foreign key process on this table for this key here. So these are interlinked, as you can see. So that's what this magic here. This guy, as you saw just before, resides in the system component model data annotations schema namespace. Yes, not in just this one, unfortunately. So as you can already see that code first approach does require somewhat its own personal learning, I guess what I'm getting at. So now we've got our two models in here. We might as well finish off the models folder, and to do that we will need another class. Now this will actually be a model, and by that I mean it's going to be something used by a view in our MVC app, and that's why I'm going to call this model. And that's why I'm saying you should really make its own folder here for your database tables rather than putting them all in the models folder here. But yeah, I've pointed that out so you can use that information if you like. And now we're just going to put in our information for our models folder. So as mentioned, this is going to be a models folder which we're going to use in the view later on, and because we just want to show a student name and the department description that they're connected with in our view. That's all we're going to do in this demonstration. So that's our models folder. What's the next step? Oops, no, I didn't want to click on that. Did. Oh, go away. Why are you there? Oh. Anyway. Right. And now that guy's come up. Thank you. Right, goodbye. So, let's add our context class. Context class, you're probably saying, what the hell is that? Let me do it first before we talk about it. So, we're going to add a folder for this one, because I like to have everything in its own place. So, and I'm going to call this a special name as well. So this is already, you can see the complexity of these sort of processes. Sorry, I don't need to call this folder. This is just going to be context. And then we're going to add a class into this. Add class. And the naming convention that you use here in this class is quite important. And I'll try to explain it as best as I can. So we're calling it DBContext employee data. That's also going to be the name of our database. So I guess that's one way of looking at it. Let me grab the code for this guy. Here he is. Okay, dokie, let's delete that. Okay, and we need to bring in our namespace. Data entity, and that should clear all those up. Now there's a couple of important things in here. We need to bring in another our models folder. Models. If you're new to C#, I have created some tutorials. What we're doing here is we're bringing in this models folder, which resides here, and then this allows the code to see the classes in here that we created. Okay, so this guy's important. He does lots. This guy obviously inherits stuff from our DBContext guy, and he is important. He has a lot of underlying processes that allows a lot of the entity framework magic to happen. I'll just leave it at that for now. And with here with this DB sets, what we're doing here is we're declaring our, not just our entity, but our tables as well. So this is going to be a database table. Now this process needs to be there before we migrate this information and create our database. But we also need this information to communicate to these tables, or to draw information out of these tables. So this area of let's call this code our context area, is highly important. In here you'll declare stored procedures that you'll use in your migration in your migration and using in your app. So this context class is highly important because it'll house or hold a lot of the important facets of your database environment. And this DBContext is also used in your web config, so he's extremely important. You can easily get confused by him. You need to use that guy in your web config connection string, which we're going to do right now. So let's add our connection string. So as mentioned, let's make this a bit bigger. So here you can see this DBContext name has to be the same as this guy here. I'm not sure if that's actually correct. There might be some technical way around it, but for the sake of my sanity, let's just go with that. So here we're just doing it locally on my machine, obviously. So you've got our connection string there. I'll just scroll across, and this is just pointing obviously to my application, which is technically incorrect. So I'm going to have to change that a little bit. 17. Oh no, that should be correct. Oh no, that's not correct. I'm going to have to change my connection string a little bit. This problem with connection strings, they can be quite sensitive. And now I keep all my code in certain areas, and I think this should be sufficient location. Let me just see if we've actually got that location. Okay, cool. So that's all fine. So yeah, this is the connection string. We've now made sure that this path is there, and we've put in here the name of our database as well. And then we've set our integrated security process, and our provider is system.data.sql client. So that's our connection string done. We're some ways there. Oops, whoa, come back to me. Now we get into the side of entity framework, which is unique to code first. I guess that's one way of looking at it. Let's save everything. Now we're going to try to migrate everything and create our database now. The code first entity framework approach is different than others, obviously, and this is the big difference between that. We have to bring up this package manager console area, and we have to issue certain commands initially when we're doing this for the first time in a certain sequence as well. So we have to first type in enable migrations. This makes the whole app, this allows the whole app to, as the name says, enable migrations to happen. And by migrations, we're migrating database information into a new database area, if that makes sense. So let's paste that and let's run it. While that's twirling away. So in this package manager with code first, there's a number of different commands that you need to do certain things. So enable migrations, I believe you just have to do once, because then the app is enabled to do that process. As we can see, it's still doing something. Next, we're going to add a migration, and that's what we're doing by that process is we're saying, right, we've just created some classes, we want to create a database table, or we've made a database change. We want to add a migration process to the overall process. And then by doing that, a special file will be created, which we'll see in a second. After that, you have to issue the update database command. And it'll actually physically make the changes happen. It'll migrate those changes up to the database area. Obviously, I think there's other package manager console commands that one can do. This to me is another reason I don't think Entity Framework's very good, because I think we should be moving away from command prompts and all that sort of stuff. It's very finicky. It's prone to typing in something wrong, like update database without an E. It's all very not user-friendly, from my perspective, that is. Other people might find it better. So, Enable Migrations has created this file here, and it's also created this migrations folder. In here, we're going to have all our migrations stuff, and in a second, we'll see another one created. This guy's always going to be unique. I prefer to make these migrations enabled to automatically make these migrations to true. It's just easier. I don't know if that's technically the best thing to do, so that needs some research done. But I like to set this guy to true. So that's this file here. This file has been created by using the enable migrations process. So let's save that. Now we're going to do a add migrations command, and you need to, this is an abstract term, that means you can put in anything there, but you need to make that one up. That's added to your migration script. It tells the migration process that this unique script, it could be called employee database first time. So you can make that completely up, but that has to be present. That tells the app, this is a script, this is the name of it, and allows it all to function. So, and this is the command here, add migration. Let's run that. Let's keep our window over here open. And via the magic of Entity Framework, we'll see, ta-da, see, we've seen this migration script come across. And you can see it's called employee database, which came from this parameter here. So what's in this magical piece of code? Our tables that we want to script over. At this stage, no database has been created, no tables have been created. This is our migration script. And so here we can see this strange form of, I don't know what you want to call it, C# SQL, that will make all our primary keys and our table structures in SQL Server. And this is what I meant by a negative the code first approach. You have, the programmer should, you might say, oh, he doesn't need to know this Entity Framework, it does it all. But in my professional opinion, you need to have some good understanding of how this code is actually doing stuff, working stuff. Obviously, we're using Lombardo expressions here, but if we've already learnt that by SQL, why are we learning two ways to do the same thing? So this whole process here, this sort of facet is a big negative for me. But anyway, let's carry on. So this is our C# create table. This command first happens here, so this is our up command, so it'll go off and try to create this, and this is known as our down command. And it'll drop anything that's already there, so it'll get rid of this, get rid of these objects if they're already there, and recreate them with these objects here. And without getting negative, dropping tables in a in a change script like this, and in a process like this, any developer knows dropping information is a highly sensitive process. So, oh boy. Anyway, so we've got our migration script. So that's pretty cool. So now we're going to do our update database, and this command will migrate this script and create our database. Hopefully, let's go. I normally don't talk this much about technology. I rather do code and just show it. But I think with Entity Framework, it does involve a bit of debate or talking about it, especially if it's not very good. But, yeah. So, should be done soon. And technically, we then should see a database, I believe, over here in our Server Explorer. To get the Server Explorer, you go to View, Server Explorer. It's still running. We're going to see if the database is actually run or created. Let's have a look. Refresh. Sometimes get this mixed up. I'm not too sure if I have to build it first and then it's there, or if we just have to do that process. I believe we just have to do this process. So our database now should be under our data connections. So ignore that message, and there we go. We can see our database. And if it's really cool, we should see our 3 tables. We'll see 3 tables, not just 2. You're expecting 2. So there's our tables. And you'll notice this migration history tables is created, and that is obviously coming here via the Entity Framework, and I'm not too sure what it holds actually. Certain processes about when migrations happened. But so here we can see our department infos table. It'll have all our keys in there. This is our personal information table. Let's see if I can. My computer is a little bit slow, but I want you to see that it has created foreign keys as well. This might take a while. I'm going to close down this. Now, I'm not going to demonstrate it today, but Entity Framework does support the process by when you obviously change certain things in your classes here. Say you change a string to a number, or you change one of the names slightly, you can then issue commands which will migrate that change up into your database environment here and make those processes happen. So you can run these commands a number of times when you're changing your database, and that might happen frequently, I guess, if you're first creating an application. That's a fair assessment. What that is doing its magic. I did forget to do something, so I'm going to make that build. Sorry about this. The speed of my PC, it's a bit slow. Oh, I think something's happening. Maybe something good. Obviously, feel free to fast forward until the pretty picture comes up. Come on, Visual Studio. Okay, if it, well, yeah, it might take, well, too long. Let's just I'll just try one more time really quickly. Maybe this has refreshed it a little bit. Come on, machine. Okay, so, okay, we're not going to go through that again, are we? No. So here in my previous code, what you should now see, no, where is it? Okay, no, we can get rid of him, we Here, this is, I guess, what I was trying to show you all. This is what is created. We can see here that the constraints are created. We've got our foreign key constraint created. So it all runs correctly, and you should get the same on your faster machine when you do the same process. Unfortunately, that did not work for me. Okay, anyway, that's a bit of a disaster. These things happen. Now, at this stage, we've got our information, we've got our database. It's all created. Let's close some of this down and try to finish this presentation. We need to now add in a controller, because now that we've got we need a database, we need to get information out of it. So just add in your controller like you normally would for MVC, which is going to call home, and we're just going to add a view for that. Now in my demo, and I'm not going to try that here because as we can see my machine's acting horribly, I've already added some information in this previous one. You'll need to do the same for yours. So how you do that, I'll demonstrate how you do that, so you can just do that yourself. Thank you. So you right click on this guy, you do show table data, that will bring this window up, and then you simply type in information. This is a primary key, so you don't need to put information there. You can just put in Fred, and what this ID here will refer to your department table. So you do the same for your department information table and how you fill it in. But just remember that this key here has to refer to this key here. So if we don't have a 1 in here, you can't use it in here. So this department 1 here refers to, as in this example, the HR department. 2 refers to finance, and we can see we've got one user with the finance department. So I've put in information. Do the same thing, do the same for yourself. So just to go right click, show table data, that will bring up this, then just fill in the information. Okay, right, so now I'm going to grab the code here, which is going to make everything wonderful. Right, let's bring in our models and our context. Models, and we need to bring in our context folder. Okay, right, so let me just make this a bit bigger. What are we doing in here? So this is our context. This is obviously created from this guy, which is housed in this area here. That's why I said this terminology here, this class here, what you name it is important, possibly because you want it to be descriptive, and it's used in a lot of the parts of your program. So this guy resides and comes from this class here. It's a key thing to point out. And so we're creating a context object here. From what I know, that's a sort of convention in Entity Framework. It's called a context object, and it's going to be used in here in our index action. So what this code does is we're creating a list of students models or student users in here, and this is obviously going to house all. We've got some unnecessary code in there. That's not very good, is it? Let's get rid of that. So this is going to hold all the students currently in our system, and as we can see, that should then be technically 3 students, and 2 of those will be in department HR and 1 will be in finance. So yeah, so we've got a little bit here of link, which is going to make that magic happen for us. In this link expression, all we're doing is we're having a join, because we want to get employee names and the departments, the student name and the department description. So we have to create this inner join link expression here. Then we're going to go here and loop through our results here and put this into this wonderfully named item here. Let's rename that a little bit. Doesn't matter too much for demonstration, but it's good to be a little bit more studious or correct. So we've got our item there. We've created a student model here. Let's rename that to be again a little bit more good coding practices. Okay, and where did B come from? Anybody know? So we're gonna, I know. So, alright, we've got this loop here because we have to loop through this, because we've got to convert this list object. I can't convert this list object into this student model object. So that's what I've created this loop for here. So we literally just get the student name out of this object here, put that in a temporary student model object, the same for the department description, and then we add it to this temporary student model. Sorry, we add the temporary student model here to the overall student model that we want returned in our view, which is here. So, okay, so let's add a view for this now. Oh, we might need to build this. We're going to actually build this guy. Let's get rid of him. So a key thing here, again, sort of to mention, is that the models that you create are going to be different than the classes you're creating for your database tables, and probably should be separated in its own folder, because you can see how this logic here can get a bit messy. Wow, it's amazing. Sorry about that. My other demonstration piece of software actually just finished building. So I do need to get a faster machine. Okay, we're still building here. Excuse me. And then we can add our view, and that should just be about it. Come on, Visual Studio. Woohoo, build succeed, yay. So let's add our view now. We're going to list all our students. So we've got the list there, and we're going to use our student model. This is where naming convention can be very helpful, because naming this as our models rather than these other names, you can identify specifically what you want to use here. Anyway, let's just click on that. Oh, no, and we want all that unclicked. We don't, in this instant, need to add this entity framework context. Sometimes you might need to do that, but in this case, we don't actually do that because we're not using the entity model to show our information. So let's just click add. It should, in theory, be the same as this code here. Voila. Okay, yay. We're not going to be passing these back, so let's just get rid of that. It's not really, well, leave it in there. So there is our view. A little bit concerned that's not coming up like it should, but anyway, it should work fine. So that's our view here. And without further ado, this is already our built website here, our web page, which demonstrates the overall process. And if we put that guy over there, as you might have remembered, we can see it's working here because we have, so Fred, Mary, Jill, two people in HR and one finance. Fred and Mary are HR, as we can see, because they're one, and that's one there. And obviously Jill is in finance because she's smart. And not saying that HR people are not smart, but she's more money-wise. Sorry about that. And so, yeah, we can see her coming up in the finance area. So, after all that toil, this is sort of shown how Entity Framework Code First works. I hope you've been able to get something out of this. This is, again, a screenshot of that code. I hope you've been able to get something out of this. Coming up soon is the model first and the database first approach. But again, I thank you for your time, and please subscribe to my channel. Thanks. Bye.